Hi everyone, Stjepan here. I'm going to continue covering Città d'Arco I played in October. This was my round 8 game. I faced Schiappoli D, who is 1700 rated, but he's a very tricky player. And looking at some of his games, he plays aggressively, plays tricky lines, and tries to complicate things. Obviously, after 2 losses and a draw in the last 3 rounds, I really had to do well in round 8 and round 9, so I didn't want to leave anything to chance, so I've been preparing. And I started with pawn to e4. Now he does several different things in the Sicilian, which he plays, excuse me, but he always plays the Sicilian. And I decided to play the closed Sicilian because I like it, and I saw that he plays knight c6 most of the time, which I just enjoy playing against. I don't always play bishop b5, but when I want a game in which I have a structural edge, I choose bishop b5, because in most positions white gets a more pleasant pawn structure, even if black gets a ton of space on the queen side. Okay, knight d4, bishop c4, all normal. e6, knight f3, queen c7. Queen c7 is slightly odd, even though that's a move you play in combination with knight f6, for example, or knight e7. Playing queen c7 first, I've never seen. I've seen knight f6, knight e7, or a6. Queen c7, and it's not really clear whether I can use that or not with something like knight b5 straight away, taking here and then knight b5. It does seem visually strange, but I wasn't sure whether I should be capturing straight away. I wanted to play d3 first, because this simply safeguards my position, and after I castle, nothing can go wrong. Whether I can get an advantage out of the opening, well, that remains to be seen. Pawn g6, and seeing this move I was really happy. Now white has to be better. The question is only how much better, and whether white is already winning. And I'm not exaggerating, because his queen is misplaced. These pawns make this bishop dreadful and make the king very unsafe because of all the dark squared weaknesses. So strategically, white is already much better. Whether white can win tactically straight away, I couldn't figure out. So here's my calculation during the game, and here's how I would try to win. So knight takes, c takes, and knight b5. Attacks the queen, attacks the pawn on d4. Now, if I can win that pawn, obviously a material advantage along with the strategic one should be overwhelming. So he really has to defend the pawn. There are 2 ways, queen b6 and queen c5. In both cases, I saw that white is much better, but I couldn't see whether I'm going to get in trouble or not. So let's have a look at queen b6. I have to play c3. That's the only logical move here, the only way to play for an advantage. Trying to open up my bishop, threatening to take. So if something like a6, then I play knight takes d4. So probably he plays dc3. And I simply continue bishop f4, threatening knight c7. He has to play d6, and now simply queen to b3. And after something like cb2, queen b2 attacks the rook, maybe f6. I saw that this has to be huge for me. But all of a sudden, I'm a pawn down. My pieces are great, don't get me wrong. I have 2 amazing bishops. I'm threatening to win everything. And I have a huge lead in development, and his king is stuck in the center, whereas mine can at least go to f1 if queen a5 check. But I wasn't really sure. And this is my lack of tactical vision, I think. If you turned on the engine in this position, this is +6. So the engine just says it's completely winning. But when you try to visualize something like this, you start seeing things like queen a5, bishop h6, he's going to trade off my bishop, maybe his king goes to f7, maybe he gets in bishop d7, just trades off my knight. What if he then plays rook c8? And I just wasn't sure. And the other option, if he doesn't play queen b6, is queen c5. Again, I play c3, trying to win the pawn. Again, he probably has to take, and again bishop f4, and again d6. Again queen b3, and if he plays a6 now, I probably can start with d4, I think, and then just take on c3. Again, This should be huge for me. Again, I couldn't figure it out. So, long story short, in this position, I was trying to punish g6 immediately with knight takes and knight b5. But I ended up playing knight takes and knight e2, which, again, after having analyzed the game, this is not winning. It's an advantage to white. Knight b5 was just plus a million. I couldn't see it, even though I knew it had to be better than knight e2, but I didn't want to risk. And this seemed a pleasant enough advantage to me. Okay, bishop g7, castles, a6, a4, preventing b5, knight e7, bishop f4, d6. Not too many pleasant options after the queen is attacked, because if the queen, for example, goes to d8, then bishop d6. If the queen goes to b6, then probably I can just play e5, give up the d5 and the f5 squares, but round up the pawn on d4 and prevent d6 or d5, because the bishop on c8 is still bad. So he plays d6, queen d2. Not really to threaten bishop h6, but to play queen b4, putting pressure on d6 and provoking either e5 or d5. So after h5, I played queen b4. Of course, d5 is not possible for the moment because bishop c7. So the only way to defend the pawn is to play e5. And after he plays e5, I thought, okay, I've made some progress, and I have. But it's not that easy still. Okay, so he castles, and now I have two choices. I can play queen b3, preventing bishop e6, which seemed the most logical move. But I actually thought for a long time here, and queen b3 is a move you want to play automatically. But then, how do I make progress on the queen side? And then I started asking myself, well, what does he want to do? I think either, if I don't play queen b3, he's going to play bishop e6, where probably I'm forced to trade, and then he wants to put pressure on f2. And then I found the plan against that, sort of justifying not playing queen b3. What else does black want to do? I don't know. I just had no idea how black is going to make any progress. This bishop seems to be bad, and it seems it's going to be bad for the rest of the game. Knight c6 doesn't really gain anything. In fact, it gives up the d5 square. b5 is not possible. I don't know. So I found the plan if I don't play queen b3 and he gets to play bishop e6. So I went for something other than queen b3. I went for queen a3. And this is a double purpose move. The first idea is bishop b4, pressure on d6, but more importantly, b4 and b5. And after b4, I would gladly play queen b3. Of course, if he doesn't play bishop e6 here, then I get to play b4. And it's arguable whether he has time for bishop e6 after that. But he did play it. I don't want to retreat, so takes and takes. And here was my plan against this open f-file. So first things first, I could start with c3, which probably should be the best idea positionally, to just get rid of my backwards pawn and liquidate some of the central tension. But I really didn't want to make this bishop good. And I understand that c3 is a move that white would like to play here. That's fine. But I didn't want to give him enough activity, more than he has now, which is basically none. So I played rook ac1 for the moment. Knight c6, king h1. And my plan is, since he's going to double attack f2, and since he has played h5, I'm going to play knight g1 and knight h3 and f3, put my knight into g5, and then slowly play either b4, b5, queen b4, bishop somewhere, and queen to d2, or get my queen on the dark squares by playing c3. Depending on what he does, I think it's inevitable that my queen is going to be coming to the dark squares. And g5 is the main weakness, so I think king h1 is strategically the most obvious move in the position. Okay, plays rook f7, knight g1, rook f8, f3. I have to be slightly careful because of the pin, so f3. Okay, king h7, knight h3. Okay, rook f6 played, and I just played queen to b3. Queen b3 seems like a strange move, and it is a strange move. But I wanted to play c3 and then get my queen in via d1, maybe. Or if what he did happens, if the knight moves, then I get to play queen b4, and after bishop g5 I get to play queen to d2. That being said, this wasn't good. I mean, I had this position should be strategically winning for white, and the engine gives it as +2 or +3, which isn't really relevant unless you understand what you have to do, which I didn't fully understand. So I should have played knight g5 straight away. And after something like king g8, I should have just continued b4, which is why I played queen a3 in the first place. So nothing's happening on the f-file, so he should probably leave the f-file and fight for the a-file. So queen b3, double pressure here, which is why knight g5 is a good move. Okay, let's say queen to d7, and now b5. Takes, maybe, okay, I think knight a5 is too risky. I think this knight is sort of stranded. I'm not sure I want to trade. I would move my queen and not trade the e6 pawn for this guy, but... Well, actually, yeah, okay, so that would be a trade. But I still think knight d8 is a more prudent move, just defending. And maybe now c3, just opening up the center. And of course he gets to play bishop g5, but and bishop h6 and then knight f7 and try to trade. But I still have time for h4, and I think this position would be easy to win. I'm not talking about the engine evaluation at all. The engine thinks white is crushing it. I'm just saying, like, what would a human do? But I played queen b3, and queen b3 is a bad move, especially because I compromised with queen a3 to be able to play b4, and now I blocked in b4. So queen b3 is not a good move. He played queen d7, defending e6, king g1, knight d8, again defending e6, and now after bishop g5 and bishop h6, I got to play my idea. I got to play queen b4 and queen d2. I should mention that taking on f6 is again very good for white, as is almost everything in this position, but I didn't want to trade pieces unnecessarily unless I was absolutely forced to. So with bishop f6, then of course bishop c1, I just take on c1, rook f6, and then knight g5. I'm not sure he can play king h6. If king h6, I can just go h4, and this king is very much misplaced here. If he tries knight f7, then queen b4, and he can never win the pawn. The trap is simple. If takes, and then king has to go back, obviously this pawn is dominating the position, and I'm gonna win the rook. I just win the rook, and if king takes, then queen d2. Basically checkmate. So I think his best move is here, and then I just win the rook. And if here, I just king h2 and take. Okay, so after bishop h6, I didn't want to trade in any case, but I played queen to b4, just reinforcing the g5 square. Okay, bishop g5, knight g5, king g8, b3. Not a good move again, but I wanted to be able to play queen d2. Of course, I have to play c3, not weaken myself further with b3, but I saw a plan. And I'll try to explain what the plan was. The positional idea to win the endgame was to eventually play a5 and get my rook to a4. Which may sound strange, but from there my rook would be able to go to b4 or c4 and then attack some weaknesses. So that was the long-term idea. Knight f7, queen d2, rook c8, rook f2, I need to defend c2, knight g5, queen g5, queen f7. I was thinking about f4, but I didn't really like it, so I ended up switching plans. And I think in this position he offered the draw, which, I mean, even if I thought it was equal, I would never accept a draw, even if he was much higher rated. Because it has to be easier for white to play, and I actually have a plan to make progress, and he does not. And besides that, I think this is winning for white. I think there's a way to win this position. So the fact that it's equal material and the major piece endgame doesn't mean that it should be a draw. So I played a5, which I should mention the engine doesn't like. It still thinks white is slightly better, but it doesn't like a5. I thought it was fairly logical and hard for a human to defend against. So, okay. He played king h7, I played rook a1. He played rook c8, I played rook a4. He played rook c5. I could trade the a pawn for the b pawn with rook b4. And if he takes, I take. Where, of course, if queen takes and queen has to take, then I take on f6. But this wasn't as clear. I didn't want to do that. This isn't enough of a weakness if he can trade off a pair of rooks. And in a queen endgame, anything could happen. So I didn't want to do that. Instead, I found what I think is a very slow plan. But for a human, I think, again, hard to defend against. I just wanted to get my king here, defend my weakness with my king, and then make progress. So, okay, here's what happened. I brought my king all the way here. In the meantime, he traded the b pawn for the a pawn. Okay, now I have a fixed weakness on a6, and all I have to do is get my queen to the other side without blundering rook c2 and queen takes b3 and checkmate stuff. He played rook b7, and now I have to be careful. If rook c2 works, then queen b3 works, and I could be in trouble. So I slowly started maneuvering my queen while still defending c2. He played queen to b5, and here I played queen a1. I actually thought for 5 to 10 minutes, and I couldn't see rook c2 working, so I played it. It actually did work, and he could have played for rook c2. My problem was that I wasn't looking for perpetual checks. I was looking for wins for black. If queen a1 is bad, then rook c2 works. If rook c2 works, I get mated. Well, that's not true. He can just go for a perpetual. With rook c2, king c2, queen b3, king d2, and now queen b2. And I saw this in my mind. I thought, okay, this is fine. It's not fine. I either lose a rook, I lose a rook back, which isn't good, or it's a perpetual check. So, for example, something like this. I don't think I'm winning this. So I don't know. Here, should be a draw. Should be a draw. Maybe I can win, but in any case, it did work, which I missed. But I would have fought on, of course, even if he did play rook c2. Instead, he played rook b6, and now after queen a3, there is no more rook c2 because the queen defends b3. And now my plan is to either triple up if he doesn't put enough pressure on c2, or to simply exchange queens. I should mention that if all the pieces were traded off the board, it's a winning pawn endgame because my king just wins the a6 pawn. If the queens get traded off, it's a winning rook endgame because I can double up on the a6 pawn and then continue with b4 and king b3 and king c4. And if there's only one pair of rooks on the board, then it's an easily winning endgame. Okay, queen c6 played, rook b4, I want to play queen a4, rook cb5, rook c4, rook c5, queen a4. And here d5 was played, and after d5 it's, as I said, an easily winning endgame. So I just take the queen, I take the rook, and I play rook f1, and my plan couldn't be simpler. He's going to be forced to remain on c6, and I just play rook a5 and then march my king into the position. Eventually, I'm just going to take on d5 and win a pawn. For example, if he plays rook d6, then I can just get him into Zugzwang with h4 or something. h4 is the only move I have to play to improve my position, to prevent g5. So for the moment, I'm threatening to win a pawn. So he takes. Now he has to defend on e5, so king f6, and now h4, and that's it. Black is in Zugzwang. That there is really nothing he could do. He could play rook b6, rook c6, but I can just get my king into the position. Okay, so here's what happened. He played rook d6. I played rook c5, preventing rook c6. I would rather have him shuffle his rook between these two, because I don't want to lose my c2 pawn, and then my king goes here. So rook b6, king a3, and king e7. Here he just gave up the pawn because it's... Eventually I'm just going to go to a5 and win the pawn. So he took rook c5, and here he played rook d6 and resigned. Obviously e5 wins the rook. So I think strategically I had good plans throughout the game, and I got to follow up on most of them. tactically, I didn't use knight b5. I didn't use knight f5 well, knight g5 check well in the late middle game, and it could have been a much simpler win. Let's put it that way. So a lot of missed opportunities, but I'm still happy with the game. I think I played okay. And again, I think if you didn't understand most of Black's mistakes, if you thought Black was making okay moves, then you can study this game closely. I think this game actually shows that my opponent's understanding of these positions is really lacking, and the weaknesses he made were just, well, fatal. Thank you for watching. Hope you got something from this one. See you tomorrow for last round of Arco. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.